You think you know BTS? You've watched every Run BTS episode, memorized every lyric from No More Dream to Yet to Come, streamed every concert film, and maybe even cried reading their old fan cafe posts at 2 a.m. But here's the thing. There are layers to this group that even the most dedicated ARMY have never fully uncovered. What if I told you that one member almost gave up on music entirely, not because of doubt, but because of a promise he made to someone he loved? What if there's a moment from their trainee days so intense, so raw, that the members themselves rarely talk about it in public? Have you ever wondered why a certain member's audition story doesn't quite match the timeline fans have always believed? Or why one iconic BTS habit actually started from a place of real pain, not joy? Tonight, we're pulling back the curtain, no fluff, no recycled fan theories, just 7 real, verified, deeply human stories from BTS's past that even longtime ARMY might hear for the very first time. Grab your seat, turn the volume up, and don't you dare skip ahead, because number 1? That one's gonna hit different. This is 7 BTS secrets from the past that even longtime ARMY may not know, and trust me, you're not ready. Let's go. Number 7. V. The phantom trainee who was never supposed to exist. Let's rewind to 2011, in the city of Daegu, not Seoul, not some fancy entertainment district, but a quiet, humble corner of South Korea where a teenage boy named Kim Taehyung was living a life completely disconnected from the idol world. V didn't grow up dreaming of stages and cameras. He grew up in Jeocheon County, a rural farming village nestled between mountains, where his grandparents raised him while his parents worked. His childhood wasn't filled with vocal lessons or dance academies. It was filled with open fields, the sound of nature, and a saxophone. Yes, a saxophone. Before V ever held a microphone on a BTS stage, his first love in music was jazz and classical instruments. He taught himself saxophone in middle school, not because anyone pushed him to, but because the sound of it made him feel something words couldn't describe. That detail alone already separates his origin story from almost every K-pop idol you've ever known. But here's where the real secret begins, the part that even fans who've followed BTS since 2013 sometimes get wrong or don't fully understand. Kim Taehyung was never supposed to audition for big hit entertainment. Let that satisfy sink in for a second. The man who would become one of the most recognizable faces on planet Earth, whose Christmas tree would chart globally, whose deep baritone voice would become BTS's secret sonic weapon, he wasn't even there for himself that day. In 2011, Big Hit Entertainment held an open audition in Daegu. Taehyung's friend, a classmate who actually dreamed of becoming an idol, asked Taehyung to come along for moral support. That's it. He wasn't there to audition. He was there to be a good friend, to sit in the waiting room, maybe clap and cheer and then go home. But fate, as it always does with BTS, had a completely different script written. When they arrived at the audition venue, a Big Hit staff member, and this detail has been confirmed across multiple interviews and even referenced in BTS's own content, noticed Taehyung. There was something about him, an aura, a presence that was impossible to ignore even in a room full of hopefuls. The staff member reportedly approached Taehyung directly and asked him, "Are you here to audition too?" Taehyung said no. But the staff member encouraged him, some accounts say almost insisted, that he should try. Taehyung, being a teenager with no formal training, no preparation, and honestly no plan, called his father to ask for permission. And his father said yes. That single phone call changed everything. He went in, he performed, and out of hundreds of applicants that day in Daegu, Kim Taehyung was the only one selected. Not his friend. Not any of the prepared, trained, polished hopefuls who had been rehearsing for weeks. The untrained, saxophone-playing farm kid who showed up as someone else's cheerleader. Now here's the layer that most fans genuinely don't know in full detail, what happened after that audition. When Taehyung joined Big Hit as a trainee, he wasn't introduced like the other members. RM was already known through the underground rap scene. Suga had his reputation in Daegu's hip-hop community. J-Hope was a recognized street dancer. Jungkook was the golden magne discovered through a nationally televised audition show. Jimin was scouted literally on the street for his visuals. Jimin came through a prestigious arts high school recommendation. But V was deliberately hidden. Big Hit made the strategic decision to keep Taehyung completely out of the public eye during the entire pre-debut period. While the other members were appearing in pre-debut logs, posting on social media, and building a small but growing fan base through blog content and YouTube videos, Taehyung was a ghost. He trained alongside them, ate with them, struggled with them, but to the outside world, he simply didn't exist. There are old fan accounts from 2012 and early 2013 where early followers of Big Hit's upcoming boy group would count the members and come up short. They knew about Rap Monster, they knew about Suga, they'd seen glimpses of the others, but there was always a sense that something or someone was missing. Big Hit never confirmed or denied it. They let the mystery simmer. It wasn't until just weeks before BTS's official debut on June 13, 2013, that V was finally revealed to the world. He was the last member introduced, dropped almost like a plot twist in a drama's final episode. And when fans saw him for the first time, that face, those expressions, that deep and unexpected voice coming from someone who looked so young, the reaction was electric. The hidden member strategy worked not because it was just marketing, but because Taehyung himself was so naturally captivating that the reveal felt earned. He didn't need months of pre-debut content to win people over. He needed seconds. But think about what that experience must have been like for a teenage boy from a farming village. Your fellow trainees are out there building connections with future fans, showing their faces, receiving encouragement from strangers online, and you're told to stay invisible. You're real, you're working just as hard, you're sweating in the same practice room until 3 a.m., but officially, you don't exist yet. In later interviews, V has spoken about how those trainee days were isolating in ways that went beyond just the physical exhaustion. He missed his family. He missed Jio Chong. He questioned whether he was good enough, especially since he started with no formal training while members like Jimin had years of contemporary dance education and Jungkook had raw natural talent that was obvious from day one. The fact that V pushed through that invisibility, that silence, that doubt, and emerged not just as a member, but as one of the most beloved, most followed, most artistically daring figures in all of modern music, is a storyline that deserves way more recognition than it usually gets. He wasn't manufactured. He wasn't scouted through a system. He was an accident of fate, a last-minute phone call, a staff member's gut feeling, and he turned all of that into something extraordinary. But if you think that story's wild, wait until you hear what happened with the member coming up at number 6. Because this one involves a decision so risky, so against the grain, that it almost cost him his entire future before BTS even had a name. Stay locked in. Number 6. RM. The underground prodigy who burned his own legacy to build a new one. Before BTS was BTS, before the stadiums, before the UN speeches, before Dynamite shattered records in languages he didn't grow up speaking, there was a kid in Ilsan, just northwest of Seoul, rapping into cheap microphones in underground clubs where the average age was 10 years older than him. His name wasn't RM yet. It wasn't even Rap Monster. In the gritty, unforgiving world of Korean underground hip-hop, he went by Runch Randa, a name that most casual ARMY have maybe heard once or twice, but never fully understood the weight behind. And here's what makes this secret so fascinating. Kim Namjoon wasn't just dabbling in rap as a teenager. He was genuinely, undeniably respected. At an age when most kids were studying for college entrance exams, which, by the way, he absolutely could have dominated, given his documented IQ of 148 and his consistently top-ranking academic scores. Namjoon was writing verses that caught the attention of established figures in Korea's hip-hop underground. He was collaborating, performing, building a name that carried real weight in a scene that despised anything that smelled like mainstream pop. And that distinction is critical to understanding the sacrifice he eventually made. See, the Korean underground hip-hop community in the early 2010s wasn't just separate from the idol industry, it was actively hostile toward it. Underground rappers viewed idol groups as manufactured, soulless, corporate products. If you were an underground artist and you crossed over to the idol world, you didn't just change careers, you committed social suicide. Your credibility was gone. Your connections would cut you off. Your name would become a punchline. Namjoon knew all of this. He lived in that world. He understood its rules, its loyalty codes, its unwritten laws. And yet, when a demo tape of his eventually reached Bang Si-hyuk, the founder of Big Hit Entertainment, a small, struggling company that had yet to produce a single major hit, something shifted. Bang PD heard Namjoon's voice, his flow, his lyrics, and saw something beyond just a talented rapper. He saw a leader. He saw the foundation of an entire group. And this is the detail that even longtime ARMY sometimes don't fully grasp in its enormity. BTS was not conceived as a 7-member group. BTS was conceived as a vehicle for Kim Namjoon. The original concept was a hip-hop crew, not an idol group, not a dancing and singing boy band, but a raw, lyric-driven hip-hop collective with Namjoon at the center. Big Hit recruited several other underground rappers to form this crew alongside him. They trained together. They recorded together. They prepared for a debut that would look nothing like what BTS eventually became. But then Big Hit made a pivotal decision that nearly destroyed everything before it started. They shifted the concept. Financial realities, market research, and the brutal economics of the Korean music industry made it clear that a pure hip-hop group from a tiny, nearly bankrupt company had almost no chance of commercial survival. The concept evolved into something more hybrid, a group that could rap, yes, but also sing, dance, and perform the full idol package. And when that shift happened, the original members walked. One by one, the underground rappers who had signed up for a hip-hop crew looked at the new direction and said, "This isn't what I agreed to." They left. Some of them went back to the underground. Some disappeared from music entirely. The crew fell apart. But Namjoon stayed. And that decision, staying, is the secret that doesn't get talked about enough. Because staying didn't just mean accepting a new musical direction. It meant Namjoon voluntarily torching his reputation in the only community that had ever validated him as an artist. The moment the underground scene learned that Runch Randa was going to debut as an idol, the backlash was immediate and vicious. Former collaborators distanced themselves. Online hip-hop forums mocked him. People who had once praised his lyrics now called him a sellout, a traitor, a fraud. He was 19 years old, and the world he'd built for himself was actively rejecting him. There's an old interview, rarely cited, buried deep in early BTS press from 2013, where Namjoon talks about this period with a kind of quiet pain that's hard to fake. He describes lying awake at night wondering if he'd made the right choice, questioning whether the idol path would ever allow him to make the kind of music that actually mattered to him. He talks about calling his mother, who had her own complicated feelings about his career. Namjoon's mother was a well-educated woman who had always prioritized academics. When her son, the one with the genius-level IQ, the one who taught himself English by watching Friends on repeat, the one who could have walked into any top Korean university, told her he wanted to rap for a living, the household tension was real and lasting. She didn't dramatically disown him or lock him in his room like a drama script, but the quiet disappointment, the unspoken "you're wasting your potential" that hung over family dinners. Namjoon has referenced this emotional weight multiple times over the years, always with deep respect for his mother, but also with honesty about how isolating it felt to have neither the underground community nor his own family fully behind him. So picture this, a 19-year-old boy, abandoned by his original crew, mocked by the hip-hop scene that raised him, carrying his family's silent disappointment. Standing in a practice room at a company so small it was literally operating out of a cramped building with one studio and choosing to keep going. Not because he was naive. Not because he didn't understand the odds. But because somewhere in that brilliant, overthinking mind of his, he believed that he could build something that transcended categories. Something that was neither purely underground nor purely idol. Something new. He became the leader not by appointment, but by default and by gravity. The other members, as they were recruited one by one, naturally orbited around his vision, his work ethic, his ability to articulate what BTS could become. RM didn't just lead rehearsals and organize schedules. He wrote the philosophical backbone of BTS's entire discography. The Love Yourself series, the map of the soul concept, the societal commentary woven through albums like Dark and Wild and The Most Beautiful Moment in Life. All of that DNA traces back to a teenager from Ilsan who read Nietzsche and Haruki Murakami between recording sessions and decided that pop music could carry the same intellectual weight as literature. The underground scene that once rejected him? Many of those same rappers have since acknowledged, some publicly, that Namjoon proved them wrong. Not by abandoning hip-hop, but by smuggling its soul into a format that reached 100 million people instead of 100. He didn't sell out. He scaled up. And the kid whose mother worried he was throwing away a brilliant academic future? He ended up addressing the United Nations General Assembly. In English. Multiple times. Sometimes the greatest rebellion isn't staying underground. It's having the courage to step into the light and risk everything you've built in the dark. Now, if RM's story is about sacrificing one identity to forge another, the next member's secret at number 5 is about something even more invisible. A struggle that happened in complete silence, behind smiles that millions of people took at face value. You're going to want to hear this one carefully. Number 5. Jimin. The actor who was never meant to sing a single note. Here's a scene that sounds like it was ripped straight out of a K-drama screenplay, except every single detail of it is real. It's sometime around 2011, on a regular weekday afternoon near Konkuk University in Seoul. A young man named Kim Seokjin, broad-shouldered, strikingly handsome, is walking to class. He's a film and acting major. His dream at this point in life has absolutely nothing to do with microphones, choreography, or fan chants. He wants to be an actor. He pictures himself on movie screens, not concert stages. He's studying scripts, not song lyrics. His world is audition monologues and camera angles, not synchronized dance formations in front of 20,000 screaming fans. And then a stranger approaches him on the street. A man who identifies himself as a casting agent from Big Hit Entertainment. He tells Seokjin that he has the look and asks if he'd be interested in auditioning. Now, here's the part that rarely gets told with the honesty it deserves. Jin's first instinct was not excitement. It was suspicion. In South Korea, street scouting scams were notoriously common in the early 2010s. Shady individuals would approach good-looking young people, claim to be from entertainment companies, and lure them into fake contracts, overpriced training programs, or worse. Jin has openly admitted in interviews that his gut reaction was to walk away. Some retellings even suggest he considered running. The idea that this random encounter on a university sidewalk was legitimate seemed absurd to him. He wasn't a trainee. He wasn't a singer. He had never danced in any serious capacity in his entire life. Why would an entertainment company want him? But something, maybe curiosity, maybe a whisper of fate that he couldn't quite silence, made him stay long enough to listen. He took the information. He showed up to the audition. And against every logical expectation, Big Hit accepted him. Not for his vocal ability, because he essentially had none in any trained sense. Not for his dance skills, because they were non-existent. They accepted him because Bang Si-hyuk saw in Kim Seokjin a quality that training could never manufacture, an authenticity of presence, a visual magnetism, and perhaps most importantly, an emotional sincerity that would become one of BTS's most quietly essential ingredients. But here's where the real secret lies, in the brutal, unglamorous gap between being accepted and actually debuting. Because what followed that street scouting was arguably the most painful trainee experience of any BTS member, and it's a story that gets glossed over far too often. When Jin entered Big Hit's training system, he walked into a room where every other person had years, sometimes a full decade, of head start on him. Consider the roster he was joining. RM had been rapping since middle school and had underground credibility. Suga had been producing music and writing lyrics since before he was old enough to drive. J-Hope had won national dance competitions and was already considered one of the best street dancers in Gwangju. Jimin had trained in contemporary dance at Busan Arts High School with the kind of technical precision that made instructors single him out as exceptional. Jungkook, despite being the youngest, had raw natural talent across singing, dancing, and performance that was almost absurd in its breadth. V, even with his unconventional entry, had an instinctive musicality and stage charisma that coaches noticed immediately. And then there was Jin. 20 years old, the oldest in the group, standing in a practice room mirror, trying to learn basic choreography steps that the other members could pick up in an afternoon. He has described this period with a level of vulnerability that's rare for any public figure, let alone a male idol in an industry that often equates weakness with failure. In one particularly revealing moment from a Bangtan bomb filmed years later, Jin reflected on how he would stay behind in the practice room long after the other members had gone to sleep, repeating the same 8 count over and over, his body refusing to cooperate with what his mind was telling it to do. His legs would move a half beat too slow. His arms wouldn't hit the angles the choreographer demanded. The synchronization that's supposed to make a K-pop group look like a single organism? For Jin, achieving that took 3 times the effort it took anyone else in the room, and every single member knew it, including Jin himself. Imagine the psychological weight of that reality. You're the oldest. In Korean culture, the hyung carries an inherent expectation of confidence, of leadership by example, of being someone the younger members can look up to. But in every practice session, Jin was the one struggling the most visibly. He wasn't the one teaching moves, he was the one being taught. He wasn't setting the standard, he was chasing it. And the industry around him offered zero sympathy. K-pop training culture in that era was notoriously unforgiving. Vocal coaches would critique without cushioning. Dance instructors would call out weaknesses in front of the entire group. Monthly evaluations determined who stayed and who got cut. Jin lived under the constant, suffocating awareness that he was the most replaceable member on paper. No musical pedigree. No performance background. No viral audition clip. Just a face that a stranger liked on a sidewalk. There were moments, and this has been confirmed through various BTS documentaries, interviews, and the members' own admissions, where Jin seriously considered quitting. Not in a dramatic, storm-out-of-the-building way, but in the quiet, corrosive way that doubt works on a person over months. The late-night thoughts of, maybe I'm holding them back. The silent comparison every time Jimin nailed a move effortlessly or Jungkook hit a note that Jin's voice couldn't reach yet. The fear that audiences would see him as the weak link. But Jin didn't quit. And the reason he didn't quit is the part of the story that transforms it from sad to extraordinary. Instead of letting his lack of training define him, Jin redefined what his role in BTS could be. He couldn't outdance J-Hope. He couldn't out-rap RM. He couldn't match Jungkook's raw versatility. So he became something none of them were trying to be. He became the emotional anchor. The hyung who cracked dad jokes when tension in the practice room got too thick. The member who made sure everyone ate, who lightened the mood during exhausting comeback preparations, who held the group's emotional architecture together when the pressure of their rising fame started to fracture individual members from the inside. His humor wasn't random, it was strategic, even if Jin himself might not have consciously framed it that way. Every terrible pun, every exaggerated windshield wiper laugh, every ridiculous face he pulled during serious moments, it all served a purpose. It released pressure. It reminded 6 younger, incredibly stressed young men that they were allowed to be human, to laugh, to not take every second so seriously that the joy of making music together disappeared entirely. And meanwhile, quietly, relentlessly, Jin kept training. His vocals improved year after year, not through natural gift, but through sheer repetitive discipline. By the time BTS released The Astronaut, as Jin's solo before his military enlistment, the same voice that struggled through basic vocal exercises in 2012 was carrying a Coldplay collaborated track with the emotional clarity that made millions of people cry in real time. His dancing, while never reaching the technical level of the performance line, became reliable, consistent, and fully synchronized, a testament to thousands of hours of practice that most fans never saw. The most poignant layer of Jin's secret isn't that he was unqualified, it's that he knew he was unqualified, accepted it without excuses, and chose to outwork his own limitations every single day for over a decade. He didn't have the luxury of talent making things easier. Everything he achieved, he built by hand, brick by brick, in a practice room at 3 a.m. while the prodigy slept. And speaking of building something from nothing, the member waiting at number 4 carries a secret from their past that involves an entirely different kind of struggle. Not a lack of skill, but a darkness so heavy that it nearly swallowed one of the brightest lights BTS has ever known. You need to hear this next one with your full attention. Number 4. Jungkook. The 13-year-old who chose his future based on one man's shadow. There's a moment in 2011 that changed the entire trajectory of K-pop, and it happened inside a television studio during the auditions for Superstar K3, one of South Korea's biggest talent competition shows. A boy from Busan, barely 13 years old, small-framed, baby-faced, visibly nervous, stood in front of the judges and sang. His name was Jungkook. He performed I Have a Lover by Lee Eun-mi, a song far too emotionally complex for someone his age, a ballad dripping with adult heartbreak and longing. And honestly, he didn't nail it. His voice cracked in places. His nerves were visible. He didn't advance past the early audition rounds. By every conventional measure, that Superstar K3 appearance was a failure. But here's what happened behind the scenes that almost nobody talks about in full detail, and this is where the real secret begins. After Jungkook's broadcast appearance, his profile was suddenly visible to the entire Korean entertainment industry. A 13-year-old kid who didn't even make it through the first televised round of a singing competition received casting offers from 7 different entertainment companies. 7. Not small, unknown agencies, established names in the K-pop machine were reaching out, sending representatives, making promises. For a middle schooler from Busan who had never formally trained in anything, this was an overwhelming avalanche of attention. And every single one of those companies was bigger, richer, more established, and more commercially proven than a tiny, struggling outfit called Big Hit Entertainment that had yet to produce a single successful idol group. Big Hit, at that point, was practically invisible in the industry. They had debuted a group called 88 and managed a few solo artists, but they had none of the infrastructure, none of the trainee pipeline, and none of the financial backing that companies like JYP, SM, or YG commanded. Choosing Big Hit over those other 6 offers would have looked, to any rational observer, like a terrible decision. So why did Jungkook choose Big Hit? The answer is so simple and so human that it almost doesn't sound real, but it's been confirmed by Jungkook himself in multiple interviews, by RM, and by Big Hit staff who were present during that period. When Jungkook visited various entertainment companies to evaluate his options, he encountered the trainees and artists at each one. At Big Hit, he saw Namjoon. RM. That's it. Jungkook watched RM perform during his visit. Some accounts say it was a rap, others say it was RM leading a practice session, and something about Namjoon's charisma, his intensity, his raw commanding presence made a 13-year-old boy from Busan say, "I want to be where that person is." Not, "I want to be at the company with the best resources." Not, "I want the biggest paycheck." Not, "I want the safest career path." A child looked at another teenager and felt something he couldn't fully articulate, a gravitational pull toward someone who embodied the kind of artist Jungkook didn't even know yet he wanted to become. He chose the person over the company. He chose the vibe over the logic. And that choice, made by a boy who was too young to even legally sign his own contract, built the foundation for what would become the most successful musical act in Korean history. But now let's talk about what happened after that choice, because this is the part that most ARMY know on the surface, but rarely understand in its full, brutal emotional depth. Jungkook moved to Seoul at 13 years old. Alone. No family. No childhood friends. No familiar streets, no familiar food, no familiar accent, because even within South Korea, the cultural and dialectal gap between Busan and Seoul is real and noticeable, especially for a child. He left behind his parents, his older brother, his school, his entire social world, everything that a 13-year-old's identity is built around, and moved into a trainee dorm with 6 older boys he didn't know. And here's the secret that gets buried under the golden magne mythology. Jungkook was absolutely, devastatingly shy. Not the cute, charming kind of shy that makes for good variety show content. The real kind. The kind where you can't make eye contact with people who are trying to talk to you. The kind where you eat meals in silence because you're too intimidated to join the conversation. The kind where you cry at night in your bunk because you miss your mom and you're too embarrassed to let anyone hear it. The Hyungs, RM, Jin, Suga, J-Hope have all spoken about this period with a tenderness that reveals just how fragile Jungkook was in those early days. J-Hope has described trying to get Jungkook to open up by being extra playful and silly around him, only to be met with one-word answers and averted eyes. Jin made a conscious effort to feed him, to physically put food in front of him because Jungkook was too shy to serve himself at group meals. Suga, who is himself naturally introverted, recognized the signs and gave Jungkook space instead of pressure, a quiet understanding between two people who process the world internally. RM, the very person whose presence had drawn Jungkook to Big Hit, became something between a big brother and a mentor, gently pulling the youngest member into conversations, asking his opinions during songwriting sessions, making him feel like his voice, both literally and figuratively, mattered in the room. This wasn't professional mentorship. This was 6 teenagers collectively raising a child. Because that's what it was. Jungkook didn't have parents in Seoul guiding him through puberty, through homesickness, through the brutal physical and emotional demands of idol training. He had 6 Hyungs who were themselves barely old enough to manage their own lives, and yet they instinctively stepped into roles that went far beyond bandmates. They became his family. And Jungkook's response to that love, once he finally, slowly, over the course of months and years, opened up, was to pour every ounce of his being into becoming the best version of himself possible. Not just good. Not just competent. The best. At everything. Big Hit, recognizing both his potential and his need for growth, made an unusual decision. They sent Jungkook to Los Angeles to train at Movement Lifestyle, a renowned dance studio where some of the best choreographers in the American entertainment industry taught. A Korean teenager, mid-puberty, limited English, alone in a foreign country, learning hip-hop, urban choreography, and performance technique from instructors who had worked with artists like Justin Bieber and Chris Brown. When Jungkook returned from that LA training period, the members noticed the difference immediately. The shy, quiet boy who could barely hold eye contact had been cracked open just enough to let a fierce, almost obsessive work ethic pour out. He didn't just learn dance moves in LA, he learned that he could survive discomfort. He learned that being alone and scared didn't mean being weak. He learned that the same stubbornness that made him choose Big Hit at 13 could be channeled into relentless self-improvement. By the time BTS debuted on June 13, 2013, Jungkook was 15 years old. 15. While his former classmates in Busan were worrying about high school entrance exams and weekend hangouts, Jungkook was performing on national television, executing choreography that seasoned adult dancers would struggle with, and singing with a vocal control that belied his age. The Golden Magne nickname didn't emerge from nowhere. It emerged from a child who was terrified, homesick, and overwhelmed, choosing every single day to get better instead of giving up. And the heartbreaking beauty of it is that he chose all of that because a 13-year-old saw a slightly older boy rap in a tiny company's practice room and thought, that's where I belong. Not a calculated business move. A feeling. A child's instinct. And that instinct built an empire. Now, if Jungkook's secret is about a child finding family in strangers, the member at number 3 carries a secret about what happens when the family you already have can barely hold itself together, and music becomes not a dream but a lifeline. This next one goes deep. Real deep. Number 3. Suga. The wounded ghost who hid his broken body to save his only dream. In the city of Daegu, in a neighborhood that most K-pop fans will never visit and couldn't point to on a map, a boy named Min Youngie grew up in a household where money wasn't tight, it was nearly non-existent. This wasn't the kind of poverty that gets romanticized in celebrity origin stories, where someone says, "We didn't have much," with a nostalgic smile, and then moves on. This was the kind of poverty where choosing between meals and bus fare was a real daily calculation. Youngie's family lived in a small, cramped space. His father worked. His mother worked. And still, the math didn't add up. Youngie has spoken about this in his solo music. Tracks under his August D persona like The Last and People carry autobiographical weight that most listeners feel without fully understanding. But the raw specifics of what he endured before and during his trainee days form a secret so heavy that even some of the most devoted ARMY have only scratched the surface of it. Before Youngie ever walked into big hit entertainment, before he was Suga, before August D became a cultural force, he existed in Taegu's underground music scene under the name Gloss. And unlike some teenage rappers who adopted the underground aesthetic for credibility, Youngie was the real thing. He wasn't performing as a hobby. He was producing beats, writing lyrics, engineering tracks, and studying the technical architecture of music with an obsessive intensity that went far beyond passion. It was survival. Music was the only thing that made Min Youngie feel like his existence had a point. Not school. Not social life. Not family expectations. Music. And to fund that music, Youngie took whatever work he could find. He worked part-time jobs throughout his teenage years, and one of those jobs was as a delivery rider. In South Korea's delivery culture, speed is everything. Riders on motorcycles and scooters weave through traffic at dangerous speeds, rain or shine, day or night, carrying packages and food orders for wages that barely cover the gas it takes to make the runs. It's grueling, thankless, and physically risky work. And it's during one of these delivery shifts that the incident happened, the one that would silently haunt Min Youngie's entire career with BTS and remain one of the most underreported secrets in the group's history. Youngie was involved in a serious accident. He was struck, accounts vary on whether it was a collision with a car or a crash from his delivery vehicle, and the impact severely damaged his left shoulder. The injury wasn't a bruise. It wasn't a sprain that a few days of rest would fix. It was structural damage to the shoulder joint that caused chronic, grinding pain with every movement. For a normal person, this kind of injury means doctor visits, physical therapy, rest, recovery. But Min Youngie was not in a normal situation. He was a trainee at Big Hit Entertainment, a company that was small, financially fragile, and could not afford to carry members who couldn't perform at full capacity. The K-pop training system operates on a ruthless logic. If you can't dance, you're replaceable. If you can't keep up physically, someone else will. There is no injured reserve list. There are no guaranteed spots. Every trainee exists in a state of perpetual audition, and any sign of physical weakness is a potential death sentence for your career. So Youngie made a decision that, in retrospect, is both heroic and heartbreaking. He hid the injury. He told no one at Big Hit. Not the managers. Not the trainers. Not even the other members, at least not in full. He wrapped his shoulder. He gritted through practice sessions that required full-body choreography, the same intense, physically demanding choreography that BTS would become famous for. He danced through pain that would make most people unable to lift their arm above their head. And he did this not for days or weeks, but for months. Potentially years. Try to sit with that image for a moment. A teenage boy, already battling depression and financial desperation, performing hours of intensive dance practice every single day while his shoulder screams in a kind of pain that never goes away, never fully subsides, just becomes a constant companion. And he can't tell anyone because telling someone might mean losing the one opportunity that stands between him and a return to a life of poverty and purposelessness in Taegu. The other members have spoken about noticing that something was off with Youngie during those early years. J-Hope, who as the main dancer was most attuned to physical movement, has mentioned in passing that Youngie's left side sometimes moved differently, that certain arm movements seemed restricted or hesitant. But Youngie always had an explanation. He was tired. He'd slept on it wrong. It was nothing. And because Youngie's personality is built around an almost impenetrable wall of stoicism and deflection, nobody pushed hard enough to get the truth. Meanwhile, beneath the physical pain, another battle was raging. Youngie has been one of the most openly honest BTS members about his mental health, a rarity in Korean entertainment culture, where discussing depression or anxiety is still often stigmatized, especially for men. In the last, released under his August D mixtape in 2016, Youngie rapped with surgical precision about suffering from depression, about social anxiety so severe that it affected his ability to function in basic social situations, about obsessive-compulsive tendencies that turned his inner world into a relentless cycle of doubt and self-criticism. These weren't metaphors. These weren't artistic embellishments. He named clinical conditions. He described symptoms. He essentially published his medical history over a beat and dared the world to judge him for it. But during the trainee period and the early debut years, 2012 through 2014, none of this was public. Youngie carried it silently. He was producing music late into the night, sometimes not sleeping at all, channeling his pain into beats and lyrics, because the alternative, sitting alone with his thoughts in a dark dorm room, was worse. There's a particular detail from this era that rarely gets discussed, but reveals everything about Youngie's psychological state. During some of BTS's lowest commercial moments, when the group was performing at small events, when they were being mocked online by fans of larger groups, when their company couldn't afford proper music video sets, Youngie questioned whether the sacrifice had been worth it. Not publicly. Never publicly. But in later reflections, he's admitted that there were nights when the combination of physical pain, mental exhaustion, financial insecurity, and the constant pressure of proving himself nearly broke him entirely. The word he's used, translated carefully from Korean, is closer to collapsed than struggled. His shoulder injury eventually became impossible to hide. Years into BTS's career, as their choreography became more demanding and their performance schedule became more relentless, world tours, back-to-back concerts, award show stages, the damage worsened. In November 2020, Youngie finally underwent surgery to repair his shoulder, an operation that had been necessary for years, but that he had continually postponed because there was always another comeback, another tour, another obligation that he refused to let his body's limitations interfere with. The surgery revelation shocked many fans, but what shocked them more was the timeline. When the full story emerged that this injury dated back to his pre-debut delivery job days, that he had been performing through it for essentially the entire span of BTS's existence. The enormity of what Min Youngie had silently endured became impossible to ignore. Every Daechwita performance, every August D concert, every award show stage where Suga hit choreography marks with the rest of the group, all of it was accomplished by a man whose shoulder was, in medical terms, structurally compromised. He didn't perform despite the pain. He performed through it, around it, in constant negotiation with a body that was trying to tell him to stop. And he never stopped. Not when the money ran out. Not when the depression pulled him under. Not when the underground scene questioned his choices. Not when the shoulder screamed every time he raised his arm. Min Youngie turned his damage into discography. He took every fracture, physical and emotional, and pressed it into vinyl. And the kid from Daegu who couldn't afford to eat properly while working delivery routes became one of the most respected producers and lyricists in modern Asian music history. Not because he was gifted an easy path, but because he refused to let the hardest possible path destroy him. Now, if Suga's secret is about pain hidden behind silence, the member at number 2 carries a secret about what happens when everything you've trained your whole life for suddenly feels like it's slipping away in front of an audience of millions. This next one is going to shake you. Number 2. J-Hope. The sunshine who was one signature away from being erased. If you've ever watched J-Hope perform, truly watched, not just glanced, you've seen something that looks like pure, unfiltered joy radiating from a human body. The smile that stretches impossibly wide. The energy that seems to violate the laws of physics. The way he moves like gravity is a suggestion rather than a rule. J-Hope feels like a force of nature, a living exclamation point, the member who exists to remind the world that happiness is a performance art. But here's the thing about forces of nature. They don't create themselves. And the man behind J-Hope, Young Hoseok from Gwangju, carries a secret from BTS's trainee days that most ARMY know only as a footnote but rarely understand in its full, devastating weight. J-Hope was nearly cut from BTS. Not nearly in the vague, inspirational way that celebrities sometimes say, "I almost didn't make it," to add drama to their origin stories. Nearly cut in the literal, documented, contract on the table sense. Big Hit Entertainment, at one point during the pre-debut period, made the decision to remove young Hoseok from the final BTS lineup. His name was on the elimination list. The paperwork was being prepared. The member who would become the group's main dancer, one of its core rappers, and arguably its single most important source of onstage energy, was about to be erased before a single note of "No More Dream" ever hit the airwaves. To understand why this almost happened, you need to understand who young Hoseok was before Big Hit found him. In Gwangju, a city in Korea's southwestern Jeolla province, far from the entertainment industry epicenters of Seoul, Hoseok was already something of a local legend. He wasn't a bedroom dancer learning moves from YouTube tutorials. He was a battle-tested street dancer who competed in underground dance crews and won. His crew was called Neuron, and within that scene, Hoseok was known by a different name entirely, Smile Hoya. That nickname alone tells you everything about his reputation, a dancer who moved with technical ferocity, but performed with a smile so infectious it became his brand. He didn't just win competitions, he made audiences feel something while he was winning them. Street dance culture in Gwangju during the late 2000s and early 2010s was its own ecosystem, separate from the idol pipeline, with its own hierarchies, its own respect codes, and its own definition of authenticity. Hoseok thrived in that world. He was respected. He was recognized. He had a path, maybe not a path to global superstardom, but a clear, legitimate identity as a dancer that gave him purpose and community. When Big Hit scouted him, it was specifically for his dance ability. The company was assembling what was originally a hip-hop group centered around RM, and they needed a performance anchor, someone whose physical artistry could complement RM's lyrical intensity. Hoseok fit that role perfectly. He moved to Seoul, joined the trainee roster, and began preparing for debut. But then the same tectonic shift that reshaped RM's journey also hit Hoseok. The concept changed. BTS was no longer going to be a pure hip-hop crew. It was going to be an idol group. And in an idol group, every member needed to do more than one thing. Dancing alone wasn't enough. Big Hit needed Hoseok to rap. Not as a secondary skill, not as a nice-to-have, but as a core function. And this is where the fracture began, because young Hoseok had never rapped before in his life. He was a dancer. His entire artistic identity, his training, his muscle memory, his creative instincts, all of it was rooted in physical movement, not verbal delivery. Learning to rap from scratch, while surrounded by RM, who had been rapping since childhood, and Suga, who could produce and write in his sleep, was like being asked to perform surgery after a lifetime of painting. The tools were completely different. The mental framework was completely different. And the people evaluating him, Big Hit's trainers, producers, and executives, could see the gap. During this transition period, Hoseok struggled. Not visibly, not dramatically, but in the measured, accumulating way that erodes confidence week by week. His rap delivery was stiff compared to the natural flow of the other rap line members. His rhythm was a dancer's rhythm, precise and metronomic, rather than the looser, more conversational cadence that hip-hop demands. Monthly evaluations, those brutal, trainee culling sessions where Big Hit staff would assess each member's progress and decide who is still worth investing in, started reflecting concerns about whether Hoseok could develop into a viable rapper quickly enough to justify his spot. And at some point, the exact timeline is debated among sources, but the event itself is confirmed by multiple members. The decision was made. Hoseok was going to be let go. The reasoning, from a cold business perspective, was logical. Big Hit was a tiny company with limited resources. They couldn't afford to debut a member who wasn't ready in all the required dimensions. They had other trainees who could potentially fill the dance role while also carrying rap or vocal responsibilities. Hoseok was a specialist in a system that demanded versatility. When Hoseok learned of the decision, something inside him fractured. Years later, in documentary footage and tear-filled V lives and the raw honesty of his solo album, Jack in the Box, Hoseok has revisited this period with a vulnerability that cuts through his usual brightness like a knife through fabric. He's described the feeling not as anger, but as a kind of paralysis, the sensation of watching your future collapse in real time while being completely powerless to stop it. Everything he'd sacrificed to come to Seoul, leaving Gwangju, leaving his dance crew, leaving the community where he was somebody, was about to amount to nothing. He would return home not as a failed idol, which would have been painful enough, but as someone who wasn't even given the chance to fail publicly. Erased before the story even started. But then something happened that, depending on your perspective, was either a miracle of group loyalty or the most important personnel decision in K-pop history. The other members fought for him. RM, as the leader and the person whose opinion carried the most weight with Big Hit's management, went to bat for Hoseok directly. The specific details of what RM said have never been fully disclosed. Both RM and Hoseok have referenced this moment in interviews, but always with a kind of reverent vagueness, as though the full conversation is too sacred to share publicly. What is known is that RM argued, clearly and forcefully, that removing Hoseok would fundamentally damage the group's chemistry. That BTS wasn't just a collection of individual skills, it was an organism, and Hoseok was a vital organ. Other members echoed this sentiment. The collective message to Big Hit was unmistakable. If you cut him, you cut something out of us that can't be replaced. Big Hit reversed the decision. Hoseok stayed. And from that moment forward, young Hoseok attacked his weaknesses with a ferocity that bordered on self-punishment. He didn't just practice rapping, he dissected it. He studied RM's flow patterns. He analyzed Suga's breath control. He spent hours in the studio recording and re-recording verses until the stiffness in his delivery melted into something fluid, distinctive, and undeniably his own. By the time BTS released Hope World, Hoseok's solo mixtape in 2018, the former dance-only trainee who couldn't rap had created a body of work that debuted at number 63 on the Billboard 200, making him the highest-charting Korean solo act at that time. His rap style had evolved into something entirely unique in BTS's sonic landscape, brighter, more rhythmic, more percussive than RM's philosophical density or Suga's raw aggression. He hadn't just learned to rap. He'd invented his own language within it. And then there's the other layer, the one that lives beneath the smile. J-Hope, as a persona, was not accidental. Young Hoseok has acknowledged, with increasing openness over the years, that his relentless positivity is at least partially constructed. Not fake, never fake, but intentional in a way that most fans don't fully appreciate. After nearly being eliminated, after feeling the ice-cold reality of how quickly everything could be taken away, Hoseok made a conscious choice to become the person who would never let the group's spirit collapse. If BTS was going to survive, and in those early years, survival was genuinely uncertain, they needed someone whose energy could pull the others out of the dark moments. Hoseok volunteered for that role. Not because he was naturally immune to sadness or anxiety or doubt, but because he understood that someone had to carry the light, and he was willing to bear that weight even on days when his own internal world was anything but bright. That's the real secret of J-Hope. The sunshine isn't a personality trait, it's a decision. Made every morning. Renewed every performance. Maintained even when the man behind it is exhausted, anxious, and privately wondering if the smile he's built his identity around is sustainable. He nearly lost everything before BTS began. And his response wasn't to become guarded or bitter, it was to become so radiantly, defiantly joyful that no one would ever have reason to question his value again. And now we arrive at number 1, the final secret, the one we've been building toward this entire time. If J-Hope's story is about nearly being erased, the member at the top of this list carries a secret about what it means to rebuild yourself completely when the thing you were most proud of is suddenly the thing causing you the most pain. This one hits the hardest. I promise you that. Number 1, Jimin, the perfectionist who starved his own body to feed an impossible standard. There's a moment, and if you've been in ARMY long enough, you might know the one, where Park Jimin, mid-interview, pauses just a fraction of a second too long before answering a question about his early days. His eyes shift. The trademark crescent moon smile flickers. And then he says something so casually devastating that the interviewer almost doesn't catch the weight of it. There were times I only ate one meal in 10 days. One meal. 10 days. Not a juice cleanse. Not an intermittent fasting trend. Not a calculated diet plan supervised by a nutritionist. A 20-something idol, at the peak of his body's need for fuel, in the middle of a performance schedule that demanded hours of high-intensity choreography daily, deliberately refusing to eat for over a week at a time. And this wasn't a one-time incident. This was a pattern. A cycle. A war that Park Jimin waged against his own reflection for years, largely in silence, while the world watched him dance like gravity had personally apologized to him for existing. But to understand how Jimin arrived at that devastating place, you need to go back to Busan, to a prestigious institution called Busan Arts High School, and to the discipline that shaped every cell of his artistic identity before BTS ever existed: contemporary dance. Jimin didn't stumble into dance. He was a prodigy. At Busan Arts High School, he enrolled in the Department of Dance as a contemporary dance major, and he wasn't just any student. He was top of his class. His instructors recognized in him a rare combination of technical precision, emotional expressiveness, and physical control that set him apart from peers who had been training just as long. Contemporary dance, for those unfamiliar, is not K-pop choreography. It's an art form rooted in fluidity, in using the body to express abstract emotion, in lines and extensions, and a relationship with space that prioritizes beauty of form over rhythmic synchronization. It demands a specific kind of body awareness, an almost obsessive attunement to how every muscle looks in motion, how every angle reads to an audience, how the silhouette of your body tells a story before you even begin to move. This training gave Jimin extraordinary gifts. The way he dances in BTS, that liquid quality, that ability to make sharp choreography look simultaneously powerful and effortless, that thing he does where a single hand movement carries more emotion than most performers convey in an entire routine. All of that traces directly back to his contemporary dance foundation. But that same training also planted something dangerous in his psychology, a perfectionism so extreme, so deeply embedded in his artistic DNA, that it would eventually turn his own body into an enemy. When Jimin joined Big Hit Entertainment, and here's a detail that's critically important, he was the last member added to BTS's lineup. Not the last revealed, like V. The last recruited. Jimin arrived at Big Hit approximately 1 year before debut, which means he had a fraction of the training time that members like RM, Suga, and J-Hope had accumulated. While they had spent 2, 3, even 4 years learning Big Hit systems, building chemistry, developing their idol skill sets, Jimin was dropped into a group that had already formed its internal dynamics and was expected to catch up immediately. And catch up he did in dance almost effortlessly because his contemporary training gave him a physical vocabulary that translated beautifully to K-pop choreography. But in singing? That was a different battlefield entirely. Jimin was a dancer first. His vocal training was minimal compared to members like Jin and Jungkook, who had been developing their voices for years. And yet, as BTS's music evolved, Jimin was increasingly given vocal parts that demanded not just competence, but emotional precision, high notes that required breath control he was still developing, sustained passages that exposed every technical limitation he hadn't yet overcome. The gap between what was expected of him and what he felt he could deliver became a source of constant, corrosive anxiety. After performances, while other members were decompressing, stretching, joking, scrolling through their phones, Jimin would replay every second of the stage in his mind with forensic cruelty. A note that wavered by a fraction of a pitch. A dance move where his extension was a centimeter short of where he wanted it. A moment where he felt his expression didn't match the emotion of the song. These weren't failures by any reasonable standard. To the audience, to the cameras, to millions of fans watching from around the world, Jimin's performances were breathtaking. So there it is. 7 secrets. 7 members. 7 stories that most of the world never sees because the stage lights are too bright and the choreography is too perfect and the music is too polished for anyone to imagine the wreckage underneath. But that's exactly the point, isn't it? V, the phantom trainee who wasn't supposed to audition, who existed as a ghost in Big Hit System, who was revealed to the world like a plot twist nobody saw coming. RM, the underground prodigy who torched his own credibility, lost his crew, carried his family's silent disappointment, and bet everything on a vision that nobody else could see yet. Jin, the actor who was scouted for a face and had to build everything else from zero, who stayed awake in practice rooms at 3 a.m. learning what others picked up in minutes, who turned his lack of training into the group's emotional backbone. Jungkook, the 13-year-old who chose his entire future based on a gut feeling about a stranger, who moved to Seoul alone as a child and was raised by 6 teenagers who became his family. Suga, the wounded ghost from Daegu who had a broken shoulder, danced through years of physical agony, battled depression in silence, and turned every fracture into a verse that millions would scream back at stadium ceilings. J-Hope, the sunshine who was one signature away from being erased, who was saved by members who refused to let him go, and who made a daily, conscious choice to become the light that held the group together. And Jimin, the perfectionist who starved his own body chasing a standard that didn't exist, who fought a war against his reflection, and who is still, to this day, learning that being enough doesn't require being flawless. 7 human beings. Not characters. Not brands. Not content. People fragile, stubborn, scared, brilliant people who walked through fire in their own specific ways, and somehow found each other at exactly the right moment in history. That's the secret that sits beneath all 7 secrets. BTS was never built on talent alone. It was built on survival. Every member brought a wound to the table, and instead of letting those wounds destroy them individually, they let them fuse the group together into something unbreakable. The next time you watch a BTS performance, the perfect synchronization, the effortless energy, the smiles that seem to light up entire arenas, remember what it cost. Remember the delivery accident, the hidden shoulder, the empty stomach, the elimination list, the phone call from a farm village, the underground legacy that was burned to the ground, the practice room at 3 a.m. where the oldest member taught himself to dance from nothing. Every second of perfection you see on that stage was purchased with years of invisible struggle. And that, more than any chart record, any sold-out stadium, any Billboard #1 is why BTS matters. This has been 7 BTS secrets from the past that even Longtime ARMY may not know. Thanks for staying until the end. If this hit you the way it hit us, share it with an ARMY who needs to hear it.